Welcome to Lakeshore Focus, a weekly show highlighting the key issues, important events, and interesting people in our region. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick. There would be no present or future without history. What is the history for this area at the south end of Lake Michigan that we call the Calumet Region? Is our history important to us, and why? Here to help answer these questions and more are two people who are engaged in a project to help preserve our past. Meet Mark Bouman, who's the Chicago Region Director for the Field Museum and President of the Calumet Heritage Partnership, and Sherry Meyer, who is the Vice President of the Calumet Heritage Partnership. So glad to have you both on the show.
Thanks for having us.
So people who are like into museums and history, I mean, how did you get into this kind of work? I mean, what calls you to be so interested in this kind of thing?
Wow, what a great question.
Because see, some people might think you're like in there dusting books off or dinosaurs' bones.
Yeah, and so I work at the Field Museum in downtown Chicago, which has got marble and pillars and dinosaurs and great stuff inside. And I actually spend most of my time outside the walls of the museum, out in the landscape in places like Northwest Indiana.
So how'd you get into this, though? What drew your attention to be interested in history and old stuff?
Some of it is just being read to as a kid and playing with maps and stuff. But I actually was an undergraduate at Valparaiso. And second day of class, they take you out on a great field trip down to Kankakee, all the way across the hills of Valpo and across the beach ridges to the sand dunes, and I was hooked. I didn't know there was a discipline. I'm a geographer. I didn't know there was such a thing as geography. And all my life, to your question, wow. I had apparently been preparing to become one, and I hit the place and time at the right time.
And there it worked.
Yeah.
So Sherry, are you an employee of the Field Museum?
I am not.
Okay, so you're like a volunteer.
I'm a volunteer with this organization, yes.
So I'll ask you kind of that same question. Why are you interested in old stuff and history and dusty things? You like to dust them off, or?
Not so much on the dusting, no. I, as it turns out, am a geographer as well. And my spin on geography is that it's history with an address. And geography takes history out of the textbooks and puts it out in the real world. And so I'm exploring this Calumet region and understanding the histories that are there and what we can build going forward.
I got to remember that one, history with an address.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Did you make that up?
That.
I think I made it up.
Yeah. You should copyright that.
Right.
I think it's pretty. It's worth selling.
Right.
He's going to be stealing it from you, so be careful. So you are doing this Calumet project, the Calumet region, trying to understand the heritage of this. First of all, what do you define as the Calumet region? That's always the first question, right?
It's a fabulous question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And again, I returned to having been an undergraduate student at Valparaiso, where there was a professor in the 30s and 40s and 50s named Alfred Meyer. And Meyer did a
That's
ton.
not when you went to school, though, right? In the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
I was thinking about it at the time. Yeah, and so Meyer did some great studies of this region, and cutting across the state line. Ken Schoon, his most recent, not most recent book, but his great book on the Calumet beginnings. Similarly, he's like, what is this place? Where did this all come from? And so we've been thinking a lot about this, like where, what
so have you
defines
determined
it? How does it hang together? We made a boundary. It's kind of a compromise boundary that cuts across the state line, goes from about Blue Island to about Michigan City. When you look at that region, which hangs together, I would say, for its landscape, its vegetation, its economy, the diversity of peoples who are gathered here, you get about 1.8 million people in that bi-state region, which is bigger than metropolitan Indianapolis.
Right. We always like to point that out to people in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
So you do Blue Island and you kind of come down. I mean, how far do you go on the Illinois side down?
Well,
like
the reason,
Crete in that area?
Yeah, I mean, the way we drew it is to capture US 30 in the region, and that has a historical reason to it because of the Sauk Trail.
The old Sauk Trail.
And yeah, so we are counting LaPorte in that scheme as well. And I think one thing that's really important about to say about that boundary, it's not etched in stone. You know, you don't have to pay your dues when you cross the line or anything like that. It's kind of a study area boundary as well for this heritage area project that we're working on too.
So Sherry, what are you guys trying to accomplish with this project? I mean, in the end of it, you said, I hope that we can do what?
So since about 1980, 85, there's been a recognition of the diverse environment and amazing variety of species that are here, plants, animals, birds. And so there was work that began at that time to create an ecological park. And that it got traction over about 15 years or so, and then in the mid-90s, organizations in the Calumet put together an application to the National Park Service to create the ecological park. And
Is that encompass the national park, or is it bigger than that?
So it's this is separate from the the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. It's separate from that, but it would be the idea of near the state line and crossing the state line to create an ecological park, and there might be some overlap. So in the 1990s, the answer came back from the Park Service that because of the fragmentation of the ecology here, and because the Park Service didn't have a classification of ecological park, that it wasn't going to work out. But what if we expand that idea and create a heritage area which would take in the natural and recreational resources that we were looking to protect, but also bring in the history and culture of this area, which of course includes industry.
So the no that you got really turned into a really better yes.
Right.
For this historical area that you're. So it's like just this big expanse of, there's not like pieces of it like a park system. It's just this everything in this area.
That's the beauty of the concept of a heritage area. It's a lived-in landscape. So you were talking about history and dusting off things. This is a landscape with dust in it, you know, and it's not a fenced-in park. It's a designation that first came up in 1984 with the Illinois and Michigan Canal National Corridor. There's now 49 of them nationally, and with President Obama comes to the Pullman area of Chicago in February of 2016 and creates the Pullman National Monument, a unit of the National Park System. And over here is the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. Now you've got park and park, and this idea is to kind of create a coherent landscape narrative that ties the two pieces together.
So what are you trying to do with this project? I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Where do you start, Sherry? I mean, what are you trying to do? Identify property, cultures? What are you doing?
Well, we are identifying properties, but these are properties that contribute to the story of America. And these are properties locally that have national significance. And so we're not seeking to own those properties, but we are seeking to shine a light on the resources and the stories that are here and how that connects to the national story. And so ultimately we're seeking designation as a National Heritage Area here in the Calumet.
Is that a designation for specific properties and
No.
buildings?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's not to, it's a very important distinction. So a national park owns and operates a chunk of property. A National Heritage Area is a grassroots coalition like the Calumet Heritage Partnership is, that includes a number of partners, and identifies, coordinates, shines a light, as Sherry said, takes steps on particular projects. You could argue that one of the things that we need here might be finding our way around. Mm-hmm. Where is stuff? Where do you go to find incredibly rare ridge and swale landscape next to the largest operating steel mill in the United States?
So it's about saying this place has a historical significance from the past,
Yeah.
but also still it exists in the present.
Absolutely, and so I think that's the part about it's an idea about heritage that says we need to understand the past in order to move forward. My work at the museum, we've got things at the museum that are 6 billion years old. I like to think of what I work on is what's going to happen tomorrow. That the past has brought us to this point. Now what are we going to do about it? And how people and nature fit together in a particular place. We would argue that this is the key thing of the significance of this region. And in fact, part of the project we're involved in right now charges us with saying what is nationally significant about this place.
You wouldn't argue with each other, you would argue together, right? So.
Oh, we argue with each other all the time. You would say, no, we don't.
No, we don't.
Yeah. See.
So how many areas have this designation nationwide?
There's 49 right now.
Okay.
And about 14 of those are by state. So we've got areas in 2 different states working together.
So are we 49th?
We would be 50th if it works out.
So we're still trying to get this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you guys are trying to prove that we deserve it here.
Well said.
What you're trying
yeah,
to
that's right. That's right.
So of this project, what's your favorite part, Sherry? I mean, just what's the part that you're just like, I get excited about? This is so much fun.
A place you're talking about, or the process
Any
itself?
part.
Okay.
Place, thing, whatever.
I just revel in the Lakeshore. No matter what time of day or what time of year you go, you're going to be astonished with what you find there. But there's a different Lakeshore that straddles the state line, which is Wolf Lake, and that's how I initially got involved in this project, was over the vision for Wolf Lake. And
which is really cool now.
Yeah,
it's really cool now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the invitation to that meeting ended up, for me as an Illinoisan, meeting a Hoosier that I ended up marrying. And so we got married at Wolf Lake, and so that's a very special shoreline there.
So I want to make sure this is on TV, that this really happens, that Illinois people and Indiana people actually do get married and date and things like that, right?
We do. And
that's amazing. So there's not as
You
big
heard
a
it here
divide as we
first.
think. You heard
Yeah,
it
right.
here. Well, it's funny because we sit over here sometimes, and when you go to Chicago, they'll say, did you come out of the cornfield? It's like, what are you talking about? And did it take you 3 hours to get here? Like,
It's crazy. Yeah,
no, it only takes a little bit. So, well, we're glad that, you have this hybrid family now, right?
we have a bi-state life.
Bi-state life. So what's your most exciting part or your favorite part of this project?
I think there are some fabulous places, and each place has a great person involved with it and a great story that connects to that. And you can't move through some of these places and not realize there is something major going on here. So just a couple weeks ago, out at the most recent section of the Grand Calumet River restoration, that's got to be nationally significant, to take 20 miles of that river, to clean it up, to create open space, to begin to connect folks from East Chicago into the landscape there. I think, and all the while, there's the toll road next to you, there's some industrial hum going on over there, and there's rare plants, and it's all kind of coming together in a place like that. How many of those transformative places, you go to Burns Harbor at Porter's Lakefront, or to the Gary Aquatorium or Marquette Park, or Southworks in Chicago, where there's now Steelworkers Park on the landscape of a former steel mill, and you get a guy, the statue you see when you come out there, made by a former steel worker who has said, art is the new steel. Now, I don't know if it's going to create as many jobs, but it's an interesting statement about the possibilities of.
Our leader in the arts here, John Kane, would tell you it's going to create jobs. So he would advocate for that strongly. The ecological story here is pretty fascinating, and so many people just don't know it and don't even see the beauty of the dunes and so forth. But the industrial story is also incredibly fascinating here, that all these people came over from Eastern Europe and from Mexico and from the South, and built this giant industrial complex that really is an envy of the world, and so much has been produced here. That's part of the story, I believe, isn't it?
That's a huge part of the story. And so we're looking at the transformation of the landscape in order to create industry, and that's in the 1870s and forward. And then starting after World War II, a recognition that this is a really rare and fragile landscape, and let's find a way to preserve this even as we maintain industry in this area. And over all that course of time, we have people coming from all across the world, as you just described, to create this.
Why do you think people have a hard time really finding this important? I mean, you guys obviously think it's important, but my guess is the average citizen, a lot of people just kind of floating around, would probably think that what you guys are doing has not any importance. It's kind of silly. We shouldn't be spending tax money on something like this. How do you respond to that? I'm not in that camp, so, but I know there's lots of people. How do you respond to that?
I think some of it might have to do with the nature of the economy. You know, it was an economy that was required lots of really hard work in situations that were very local to a particular place, a particular community, particular industry perhaps, that taking the 2 steps, it didn't permit the 2 steps back to look at the overall picture. This isn't the only industrial area that has struggled to think of itself in a time of in positive terms. Exactly right. So there's that. I think the state line is a factor. It leads to competition, and rather than seeing the coherence of the whole piece, I think there are just inherent difficulties built into a landscape like this. The battles between labor and owners, the way that households have, folks who work in the mill and folks who are at home. Bringing the people together has been problematic. And again, I'd come to some of the things that are about national significance of this place.
Well,
who would have thought you could put a national park with a steel mill in the middle of it? Well, that was thought up here and done here. Who would have thought that you could take a river like the one I described and restore it to the condition it's in now, which is fantastic? Who would have thought that art, like John Kane, whom you mentioned, and who's on our board of the Calumet Heritage Partnership.
See, I didn't even know that, but
and he's
he's going to owe us all for getting his name out
wonderful
there.
vision, exactly right, of how people describe and capture what they're seeing around them, that now is attracting, groups like Forgotten Chicago. Okay, yeah. So these are guys who, the 20s and 30-somethings, who love places that don't fit the mold of the usual landscape where you would see. So again, here it's that industry and nature right next to each other uneasily, mostly, but working through to solutions. Yeah.
Obviously you guys have a tremendous amount of passion for this, but I still, and I believe our audience that watches public television are probably on the side of going, this makes sense.
Yeah.
So maybe help equip them a little bit.
Yeah.
So Sherry, I know you know this experience of when you're talking to somebody about this and you're excited, because I can tell every time you talk about it, you're excited, and the person's looking at you like, what? This makes no sense, that this is exciting. And you can tell they definitely are not on the same plane with you about this. What do you do to kind of bring them around a little bit, or try to get them to feel some of it?
Well, if we can take history out of the history books and give it an address and put it out there in the world where these events happened and where the people of this region have been contributors to that history, to the writing that we've placed on the earth, then it connects people with each other, it connects communities across time, and it suddenly becomes valuable, and people begin to recognize that they had a role in something really important. And we want to shine that light on local lives.
Are you a writer of any sort? You have a really good way with the words. She's just kind of like poetic with your words.
Yeah.
Do you write?
I do some writing. Yes.
Okay, so
there you go.
See, I just guessed that. Didn't even know that
good.
about you. So we're down to a couple minutes here.
Sure.
And if there's something that you really wanted the population of this region, which is all across over in Illinois and everything, that's our viewership too. What do you want them to know about this project or wish they understood better? Again, we've got probably about a minute here. What do you wish they understood better?
Well, I think knowing that there are hugely valued assets for their global significance, whether it's global significant economy and technology, or globally significant biodiversity, that it's right in their backyard. It's right here. It's an asset locally that people globally care about.
Right.
But to bring it to the global stage, efforts like the one we're involved with help to coordinate, shine a light, as Sherry said, and get folks to take their local stories and to see them as something that matters, that people actually outside of the region care about passionately, as well as hopefully folks here.
Short thought from you, just what do you want people to understand about this?
That our local lives do matter, and that as we go forward with this heritage area process, that we're going to be telling our own story and celebrating it while bringing other people into this awareness and on this secret as well.
Okay. Well, we're going to try to make it not be a secret any longer, and hopefully this show is going to be one of those things that helps it. Make sure you tell, we're at the end of time, so I'm not going to be able to do anything else, but make sure you tell Laura thank you.
CalumetHeritage.org.
Okay, that's good. We'll make sure we got that in there. Thank you both for being here. This was fascinating.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Have you noticed that I often begin my reflections at the end of the show with a definition of a word? Words are fascinating, and their meanings are often improperly understood. Today's word in need of defining is heritage. My compilation from an assortment of sources boils down to a few key components. Heritage is a noun, a thing which is handed down, passed to, or inherited by a next generation. The something can be traditional practices, attributes, immaterial possessions, titles, properties, or estates. It seems implied that the heritage must be perceived as valuable by the giver or the receiver. Even better, both parties. Now that we've established what a heritage is, let's talk about the actions needed to impact a heritage. After it has been valued and moved from generation to generation, it must be protected or preserved in some manner. If it is tangible, it may be as simple as making sure it doesn't get lost, destroyed, damaged, or taken. When the heritage is intangible, it may be a little more difficult. One needs to assure that it is not forgotten or modified in some way. All of these actions take place in the present. In the present, one can also create a heritage. The something I spoke of earlier must first be identified and then viewed as valuable. Here's where the work begins. Getting the current generations to truly believe in the value of the heritage and at the same time planting the seeds of interest with the next generation may be a huge task. If one is successful in this process, the next phase is planning for it to continue for years to come. Doesn't all this sound complex? If it was simple, there might not be much value in it. Our history is rich with those things which have become our heritage. I challenge all of us to look around and see what is in your life, in your family, in your community that has historical value and worth. Now ask yourself, what am I doing to protect, create, or plan for the preservation of that heritage? If you take the time and make the effort, someone out there, years ahead, will thank you for what you did. We hope you enjoyed this show and have learned something about our region and its historical significance. We appreciate our viewers, whether they have watched it at our regular broadcast time or consumed it via the web. No matter how you access the show, we would like your comments and thoughts. You can reach us through our email address or website, both listed on your screen. Be sure and join us again next week for another Lakeshore Focus. Until then, I'm Keith Kirkpatrick saying, make a positive difference in our world today.